Hi, I'm Scott Cusey, and welcome to Car Care Seminar. You know, Car Care Seminar is designed to help you become a successful do-it-yourselfer. And doing your own repairs really isn't that difficult if you have a manual, take your time, and use our advice. Now, doing your own repairs can benefit you in several different ways. First off, you gain the satisfaction of performing the repairs on your own. Secondly, you'll know that the repair is done the right way each and every time. And thirdly, you can save money. And that's our goal, is to help you become successful at doing all three items. Now, when you're doing your own repairs, of course you're going to need a few tools. Now, many of the tools that you're going to use are common hand tools that you'll have right around the house, but we're going to have some specialty tools, and that's one of the things that we're going to cover during this chapter. In Chapter 2, we'll take a look at inspecting, removing, and installing a new set of McPherson struts. During Chapter 3, we'll take a look at a newer style of McPherson strut common on the front end of many GM vehicles. Now, during Chapter 4, we'll take a look at how easy it is not only to inspect, but also how to replace your own shock absorbers. But as I mentioned earlier, right now, let's spend a little bit of time talking about some of the tools that we'll be using throughout the repairs demonstrated on this tape. Everybody knows that you're going to need a real basic set of hand tools. That might include wrenches and pliers and a socket set and hammers and things like that. And many of those items you might already have in your toolbox. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about those areas, but let's spend just a short amount of time talking about some of the specialty tools that I like to have on hand. One of those items is a hydraulic jack. Whether it's a bottle-style jack like this one, or maybe it's a floor-type hydraulic jack, you might need a jack like this to get underneath the suspension of your car to raise it up so you can do the work that's necessary on it. So your vehicle's jack might not enable you to do that very easily. So hydraulic jack can really be a time saver. Also, if you are raising the vehicle up, make sure you support it with a set of jack stands, and that'll help steady the vehicle to make sure that the vehicle isn't going to fall down off the jack. And I like to leave the jack underneath it as well as the jack stands for safety precautions. Now, if you are going underneath the vehicle to work on it, one of the things you always want to have on is a pair of safety glasses, or if you're a person that wears glasses, you might want to have a pair of safety goggles on, and that'll keep the rust and dirt particles and stuff like that out of your eyes, so you're just protecting your eyes because you only got one set of them, and they are important. Now, in our next chapter, we're going to be talking about shock absorber replacement. And one of the things you'll have to do is actually remove this nut that I'm turning on top of the shock absorber to be able to get this plate and the bushing off from the shock and get the shock out from underneath the vehicle. But a lot of times, that nut right there will be corroded and stuck on the shaft. You go to turn it, and the shaft turns along with the nut. Well, now what do you do, especially if it's in a tight area? Here's kind of a neat tool that has an adapter in it like this that fits, has a broach stand that slides down right over the shaft of the shock absorber itself, and then another piece like this that slides down over that, goes on the nut piece. Now, you can hold the shaft up here while turning the nut off down here. And it also works kind of neat for reinstalling your new shock, too. So, not a real expensive tool, but can sure make the job go a lot quicker and easier. Now, if you are working on the suspension of your vehicle, one of the things you probably are going to need is a torque wrench, because many of the fasteners on struts and shock absorbers require to be tightened to a certain torque specification. So to do the job right, make sure you got a torque wrench. Now, the next item that I've got here is many times referred to as a tie rod separator or even a pickle fork. And because of its fork-shaped design, what it is made to do is go around a stud of a joint similar to this, and yet it has a wedge-shaped design, so you drive it in with a hammer and you're able to separate some of the steering components that you may need to remove so you can get your struts replaced. So that's an item that is not that expensive to buy, or you might be able to rent it at the place that you get your shocks or struts at too. Now, the next item I'd like to talk about real briefly is a coil spring compressor. And this is a pair of them right here, and you need a pair of them to replace the McPherson struts on your vehicle, because what you're going to be doing with this is compressing the coil spring once you've got the strut assembly out of the vehicle, so you can transfer the coil spring and its mounting plates onto your new McPherson strut assembly. So make sure that you have a spring compressor like this, and be careful when you're doing those springs, because the springs do contain a lot of pressure and a lot of power. So please be careful when you're using a tool like this. Now, when you are replacing your struts, many times people will overlook the fact that you've got a upper support housing similar to this one here that has either rubber bushings or even a bearing inside of there. And many times you'll get a clunking noise up in the front end of the car, and it'll sound like it's coming from the strut. Well, the reason it sounds like it's coming from the strut is because it's actually coming from the support cushion that's right here. And many times it'll be worn out, deteriorated. Good idea just to replace them along with the struts and make sure that the job's done right the first time. Now, last thing I'm going to talk about is a tool that's used on many of the GM W10 style chassis vehicles in the front strut area. And these are spanner nut wrenches. This one happens to be a 3-prong wrench, this one a 4-prong wrench. And they're simply used for turning the spanner nuts out that are securing the top end of the strut into the vehicle. Now, you might see a wrench sometimes that is one wrench that would have one of these on each end, or a pair of wrenches like this. In either case, you do need this type of a tool to be able to get the struts out of that vehicle. The one neat thing is, on those vehicles, you don't even have to jack it up or get underneath to do it. So actually, some of the replacements on today's vehicles are easier than they used to be. And to help you get the job done the right way the first time, make sure you have the right manual to go along with your repairs. I like to have a manual that's specific to the vehicle I'm working on, and it can really be a time saver when it comes to doing your own repairs. So make sure you look into getting a manual for your particular vehicle. Right now, I'd like to take just a moment to thank you for choosing Car Care Seminar and congratulate you on your way to becoming a successful do-it-yourselfer. Right now, let's get started with our first repair.
Today we're visiting with a suspension expert, Sam Strauss from the Merrimont Corporation. He's going to tell us about McPherson struts. Sam, glad you could be with us.
Pleasure, Scott.
What is a McPherson strut?
Well, Scott, a McPherson strut is everything a shock absorber is, but it's been designed to eliminate some suspension components that are normally found in your conventional suspensions. Namely, the rod is beefed up to take the same place as a control arm. You can see in a conventional shock, the rod is much smaller. In the McPherson, it's much larger to take those loads, whether they be acceleration, braking, or lateral loads and turning.
Okay, where did the design for a McPherson strut come from?
An engineer worked for Ford Motor Company by the name of Earl McPherson, designed it in the early 30s.
Why has it become so popular today on today's vehicles?
It's become so popular in today's vehicles to save weight. By eliminating the upper control arm, it saves quite a bit of weight and room and allows more room for front-wheel drive components.
Okay. Now, how do I tell if my McPherson strut needs replacement?
Well, there are two ways of telling, both physical indicators and performance indicators. Some of the physical indicators are leaking, rusted out spring seat, dented body, which will mean that chances are you can't get the correct alignment angles in it, are all clear reasons to replace the strut.
So that's something that I'd have to probably crawl underneath the vehicle a little bit and do a little inspection to find out.
That's correct. Your performance indicators are things like nose diving at a stop sign, a lot of body lean while going around a turn on an expressway, squealing of tires and so forth, are indicators that you need to replace the strut.
And that I can tell just by driving the vehicle down the road.
That's correct.
Okay.